You're inside Brunch, and my guest is here with me, and I thank him so much for taking the time to come with us. Mr. Yuri Johan Ronald Saunders. Take the entire thing. Attorney Saunders, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Rennie.
It is good to have you here. The issue at the top of everyone's lips is ISIS. ISIS fighters, terrorist group declared by the world, by the United States and a number of countries in the world, including Trinidad and Tobago being a signatory, recognizing that this is a group that is called a terrorist group. And there are young men who are leaving Trinidad, people who are leaving Trinidad, going out to Syria, finding ways to do that, whether it be Syria or Iraq, folks going out there to join the freedom fighters. Many believe that this is done not as mercenaries, but instead because they are ideologists. They're idealists. They believe in ideology, and following that ideology, religion is what is taking them out there. Whatever is the motivation, however, is not in question here. What is in question is the fact that they have allegedly gone out there and fought, and now they are looking to return. They are Trinidad and Tobago nationals, have gone out there and fought. The former Attorney General, Gary Griffith, believes that they must be stopped out of hand. He said, let us ban them from coming here because it's the only way that we send a very clear message that you cannot go out and do this and expect to return to Trinidad and Tobago. That's one view. I would have listeners know I contacted Mr. Griffith, who is out of the country, but we will probably get him in part of our conversation at another time. So let us just deal with the whole question. Can a country strip a citizen's right of return because he has, as is alleged, gone out and fought for a terrorist organization?
Well, a country technically can do anything it likes. The question is whether it would be legal. Whether Trinidad and Tobago can do so given the constitution it has, I don't think so. It would have to firstly amend the constitution. The constitution firstly makes provision for Trinidad persons born in Trinidad being citizens of Trinidad. It also prescribes that if the government intends to pass laws to abridge or determine a person's citizenship, so perhaps a person wishes to renounce their citizenship, it provides that the person should have another citizenship of another country, which of course they can fall back on. So from my reading of the Constitution, it would not be possible to render a person stateless consistently with the Constitution as it now stands. Apart from that, there's also the fundamental right to freedom of movement, which would be violated, I believe, by rendering persons stateless by removing their citizenship.
There is agreement with you on that. It is the view of the Attorney General, Mr. Rawi, who has made it very clear that we are to use the laws of Trinidad and Tobago to go after folks when they return here. But he has stated quite clearly, including Friday rather, in the Parliament, that to make someone stateless is a very serious matter that may not be as easy as folks willy-nilly throw about. Is a solution.
Well, I would agree with that. Whereas the off the cuff and the instinct is to take a very assertive approach to it. A government, I would agree, can't be seen to take something like removing a person's citizenship without due process lightly. It must be considered seriously, one, and of course the implications to the fundamental rights of the individual and the rest of the edicts of the Constitution need to be taken into consideration. So I certainly agree that it is not as easy as saying strip them of their citizenship when they return to Trinidad.
My guest, corporate law, is his area, constitutional issues. Of course, he's familiar with civil litigation, and he is a member of the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Yuri Saunders, we are talking to, and we're talking about this question of statelessness. I did do a cursory look and inquiry as to where our constitution is, and it does not make that provision for us to make someone stateless. As you say, a government can do whatever they can. But I do want to ask this: because of the events that has happened here in Trinidad and Tobago, not limited to what happened in 1990. Folks are doing the knee-jerk reaction. We understand why folks want to be as harsh as possible. But I do have to ask this question. Is there a precedent anywhere for someone being made stateless? I know we have identified, Trinidad and Tobago, you need constitutional change to do that. But is there a precedent anywhere in the world for this?
Well, Usually statelessness occurs because of happenstance, refugees, etc., natural disasters, etc. I do know of one instance in Africa, in Ethiopia in the late 1990s, when there was a referendum to determine whether Eritrea should secede from Ethiopia. What happened there was that the government of Ethiopia, having been determined by referendum that Eritrea should secede, the government of Ethiopia decided to expel, for lack of a better word, persons who were really Ethiopian citizens who had voted to secede, who had voted for Eritrea to secede from Ethiopia, essentially. So what you had was, even though their constitution had quite clearly stated that persons who were of Ethiopian citizenship could not be deprived of their citizenship or their nationality contrary to their will or by force, the Ethiopian government outright did it by edict. You see, without amending their constitution, without going through the proper legal channels, they did it solely by executive edict. It was illegal then, but it is a precedent for persons being rendered stateless, because of course Eritrea had not been declared a state as yet. I don't know that they had set up their citizenship organs, etc., to deal with whether these Eritreans or the Ethiopians who had voted for Eritrea to secede were actually Eritrean citizens at the time that they were expelled from Ethiopia.
Have we, from the best of your knowledge, any international agreement that we have signed on to? I know there is a commitment for to collectively with the international community to fight terrorism. Right. To the best of your knowledge, have we signed into anything that explicitly says Trinidad and Tobago accepts ISIS as a terrorist group, or have there been any independent declarations that ISIS is a terrorist group? There's a reason for that question, but let me get the first part answered.
Sure, I believe so. I believe in 2014, the Prime Minister attended a United Nations Security Council meeting where a resolution was passed that ISIL and other groups, I believe the Al-Nusra Front was another one of them, were designated as, recognized as terrorist groups, and the Prime Minister then, as she was, gave a commitment to the UN to do everything that Trinidad could to put in place in its laws edicts to deal with foreign fighters leaving Trinidad to go to ISIS or any other such organization to fight or to help fight.
Anything the country can do, but does not, to the best of your knowledge, again, is it written anywhere that it includes abridging a citizen's unfettered right to return to his country?
Well, the part of the commitment that the Prime Minister made was to put in place measures which were consistent with Trinidad's international organizations. And as I said, removing someone's citizenship would be a breach of the fundamental freedom of movement, right? From the right of freedom of movement. And so certainly I don't think that Trinidad's obligations under the commitment that it made would extend to something like that, to removing a person's citizenship without due process, or removing a person's citizenship so that they would become stateless.
So you see, there are many sides to this, and like I said, en route to responding to a real threat, en route to responding to a real experience, unfortunate, that Trinidadians had in the 90s, Trinbagonians had in the 1990s. I understand the fervor to do something to prevent any possibility of it recurring, but as the Attorney General said, there are many sides of this we have to consider. One of them is to ban a national returning to Trinidad and Tobago is an assumption of guilt. I mean, it is an assumption of guilt before due process, because I can show you a video with you in anywhere, maybe training to do something. I have no proof that you in fact fought. I saw you there with a gun. So I mean, due process is something that one must do. There is an assumption of guilt if a government decides to just say that you can't come here because you fought so and so place or because you visited so and so place. Not true?
Well, certainly, to take any kind of penal action without the person being convicted of breaching any Trinidadian law would, of course, affect their right to due process and the right to the protection of the law, which is enshrined in the fundamental rights of the Constitution.
What options would you say is left to a government where, to Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, it's a real situation. Fighters have left here, they've gone out. We know that in the case of one terrorist, the AG has gone forward and he says, I'm going to grab the property and so on. This person is serving life in the United States, so it's not an issue as to what we do when he returns here, but in fact, there's property we'll go after. But what option is there? We have explored the area that it is not as easy to say, I'm going to strip this person of their citizenship and stop them. So they're coming here. What options are there for the government? Let them in and charge them if they broke the law, charge them or monitor them. What options legally you see?
Well, there's certainly the Anti-terrorism Act, which has been passed in Trinidad and which makes provision for dealing with persons who have committed terrorist acts within Trinidad and outside of Trinidad. Although what amounts to a terrorist act has been defined quite widely, the definition does not include a person who simply affiliates with a terrorist organization. And so a person who perhaps goes to ISIL to teach or to be a doctor perhaps would not be caught by the legislation. And so perhaps that is a hole in the legislation which should be treated with. But certainly persons who go to fight, go to encourage persons to fight, go to these kinds of things. Which
aid and comfort is something that has been used often. And I would think someone teaching or in fact treating medically other people would fall into the category of aid and comfort, wouldn't it?
Well, it would, yes. So the question would be whether or not by providing that service, the person would be committing an act of terrorism. From my reading of the legislation, it seems to strike at persons directly aiding a terrorist organization, directly committing an act which can be considered a terrorist one, right? So perhaps treating someone, being a teacher, I don't know whether or not the legislation, the language using the legislation is wide enough to capture that as yet. Because of course, the person may just be there solely to teach young children. As far as they are concerned, they're the children who are among ISIL, who are uneducated, quite young. And as far as they're concerned, they should be taught by someone. They shouldn't be grow up to be ignoramuses and perpetuate the same kind of tomfoolery that perhaps the other older ISIL members
are accused of, yes.
So it's a gray area, I would think.
Yuri Saunders, Attorney Yuri Saunders, is our guest inside Brunch. We are talking about the situation with ISIS fighters. You raise a very important area there, and that's the area of where we have had families, wholesome families, husband, wives, and children. Reportedly moving out of Trinidad and taking their family there. What happens to the children, for instance? And all of this is part of the equation and the consideration, because if you're saying we're going to ban them, which we have established, I'm just continuing that argument for those who want to stop them from coming here, then you have a problem. What happens with their children?
Yes, of course. It is a very heavy-handed and assertive position to take, certainly for any government. And consistent with the Attorney General's comments, I would think that a government would have to seriously consider the logical implications of doing something like that.
One of the areas that's opened up by Gary Griffith is for the government to use another option. That option, he suggested, and he was not the Attorney General, I apologize. He suggested that another option would be to remove the responsibility of any blocking action from the hands of the government. He said, according to the United Nations resolution against terrorism, Trinidad and Tobago is allowed to forward information on people suspected of having terrorist links to the international allies. What is your take on that?
Well, of course, that kind of action would, depending on the information, may run afoul of the right to privacy enshrined in the Constitution. So that would be one of the concerns which I would have in it. Certainly, I do not know that there has been any legislation introduced to deal with what kinds of information can be farmed from various individuals and sent to other states in relation to persons who are suspected of being terrorists and this kind of thing. These are the issues which I expect would come to the fore if that kind of approach is taken.
I invited some telephones, and I expected that we would get rather busy on this morning. I got your point. I'm going to pass this on to the attorney in 1 second, just to say that same argument is sort of what's propelling our discussion this morning. They came for this one, they came for that one. There is danger in precedents. When there is a precedent, it can be used for many other reasons, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about. Let us be careful that how we are responding to this threat that we have. The threat is real. The organization and what they do is dastardly. That is agreed. What is the issue is if the country has the right to ban them, to make them stateless, as it were.
Well, that's correct. That's correct. I mean, there are many approaches the country can take to dealing with these individuals. The question is, which ones should they take? Of course, they can't take those which, by the Constitution as it stands now, are illegal. At least they can't take them immediately. They would have to amend the Constitution, certainly. Before they can even do that, however, then they need to consider whether that is something that needs that needs to be done, or something that they need to do in order to deal with to address the problem. There are other mechanisms which they can put in place to deal with it. For instance, the Anti-terrorism Act, that's one. They could amend the act to deal with persons who are affiliated with ISIS. That's two. That certainly, I think, is a lot less heavy-handed and more, at least more effective, at least in the short term, to deal with a problem such as the one we're facing with ISIL fighters. Trinidad citizens going abroad to fight in ISIS.
The former Minister of National Security, Gary Griffith, is strongly against having these folks land here, which is the general feeling that we have received by opening unscientifically our phone lines during the week to our callers. A lot of folks are against the idea of letting them get in here, but the question is, constitutionally, can you do it, and the dangers of doing it? That is our discussion, and that is the view. Joy, thank you so much from Washington D.C. That is the view of the former Minister of National Security. He says that we must put up something there that is a deterrent to stop other people that think that it is all right for them to go join their group for ideology or for money, that they can do this and come back and feel that they are comfortable. He's saying that we must put up something there that is very clear, a disincentive for young folks to go. And I agree with the disincentive. I am just, like I said, I'm really torn between here, but what I think is really unimportant right here, what the law states is what we try to identify, correct?
That's great. I can understand that people are quite concerned about things like that, which I believe should be of concern. But at the same time, you have to be wary of implementing a piece of legislation or taking a course of action which is prejudicial to persons' rights without, especially, due process, right? So as simple as it is to the immigration officer inspects a passport, notices the person is back from Iraq or Syria, figures this person has no business being in Iraq or Syria, they must have been fighting ISIS, you can't come back into Trinidad ever. The person is not a citizen of any other country. It poses a great concern to I would think, any government treating with their citizens in that manner. So I really think that is what the Attorney General was trying to get at when he was saying it was not as simple as simply expelling these persons from Trinidad on returning from the Middle East.
Specifically to deal with the Attorney General, what he said on the issue of designation of foreign terrorist fighters and how the authorities can treat with it nationally, he said it was an issue of international law. He said that talks are being held onto whether one was allowed to bar the entry of alleged foreign terrorist fighters, claiming such a move would lead to the creation of statelessness. The Attorney General went on, saying it is important to have the proper evidence of foreign travel, such as dates and entries, participation and departure from that country, the host country. He said if you bar people from entering the country, as is being proposed by some jurisdiction, you have to make sure these entities that have been bounced from your borders go somewhere and are treated somewhere. Who treats with statelessness? And that is the reason we're having the discussion this morning. It is one thing to want to deal with a threat. It's another thing as to whether your constitution, whether your laws allow it, And I think primarily that's where we are.
Yeah. I don't think I do think that there's some the concern is valid that in simply expelling persons you render them stateless, and that's not something that can be treated with in an off the cuff or knee jerk way. A similar view to those that have been expressed before. And again, I would say that while that is the governing sentiment, the fact is, we have, as the caller rightly said, we have laws already in place to deal with how we behave ourselves in other ways, right? And one of those laws is that persons are free to move from place to place without prejudice and without fear that their citizenship will be annulled. Now, if you have two perceivably conflicting obligations. One is already enshrined in law. One you are currently proposing, that is expelling citizens from Trinidad and Tobago. You have to consider what you are giving up in taking one away. For instance, you have to consider that in abridging a person's freedom to move as they will, you will trap, or you will perhaps be able to target or punish persons who may not necessarily be guilty of an offense, and then these persons are now stateless.
You see, these are the issues that the Attorney General raised, and you were both clearly in concert here. He acknowledged that the rights enshrined in the TNT Constitution, as well as the Treaty of CARICOM and the International Court of Human Rights, provided an avenue for those people who seek redress both locally and international. But he goes on to say our jails are made to be used after due process has been carried out. So we don't necessarily share the view that we ought to bounce somebody at the airport. It comes back to the question of due process. And if you're not careful for it, for one person today, using the analogy the gentleman used earlier, careful when it comes to your doorstep the next day.
That's right. You have no idea who could be the target or who could be the subject of any legislation passed to deal with persons returning from a foreign country who presumably being doing it because they're not being convicted of anything, has been associating or has been fighting in ISIS.
We try to address and to deal with and practice due process as accepted all over the world. There is nothing that says that we cannot deal with people who are accused of breaking the laws of the country. Once they go through the due process, that's the issue. But you cannot just make somebody stateless, is the view of the AG we did discussing this morning.
Well, firstly, what I had been saying was that the Anti-Terrorism Act, as it stands, I do not believe the words are wide enough to cover persons who go to ISIL or go to ISIS to teach or to treat persons because they're doctors, etc., etc. That is just a fact. That is the state of the legislation as it stands in Trinidad and Tobago. No, I was not suggesting that persons who did that were not in some way encouraging or aiding or helping ISIS. That's the first thing. That was just a fact of the legislation of Trinidad and Tobago as it stands. Whether the legislation should be amended, whether further legislation should be passed, is another matter, which of course the government and the population in Trinidad and Tobago will have to deal with. Secondly, when you're talking about the ISIL state, I do not know if persons on perhaps whatever they sign up with, if they do sign anything to associate themselves with ISIS, I do not know if one can consider that citizenship of any country, right? The fact of it is that once you expel them as being citizens from Trinidad and Tobago, they have no juridical tie to any other nation state. They may have an affiliation with an organization which considers itself an entity vying for a state, but I do not believe ISIS is recognized by a state, by any government in the world.
No, they're not.
So
they're not.
There's a difficulty there. 15
minutes away from the top of the hour, you have in Brunch at 107.7. My guest is Yuri Saunders. We are looking at the situation and the statement made by the Attorney General as to why we do not willy-nilly or knee-jerk fashion deal with this question of banning people from coming. The view of the former Minister of National Security, Gary Griffith, is that what we can do is inform, make it clear to people that if they decide to go and fight overseas, join such a group as ISIS, they cannot return or will be blocked in other states en route to their home country. We will keep the lines open to other people too. Dee's making the point of how easy it is to remove people who are here illegally, whether they've overstayed or whatever, to deport them, but that they're two separate issues, are they not?
Yeah, of course. Persons who are here illegally have citizenship somewhere else.
Yes.
They're here without reason or cause, presumably, and not being citizens, not having a residency, they cannot stay. As long as they're out with the given period they were supposed to have stayed.
Attorney Saunders made it very clear to me when we spoke before we got here that we are dealing with the whole question, not whether one is in agreement or disagreement can justify or not justify the merits or demerits of those who are going out to fight. We're dealing singularly in the area of the commonly held view that we can just ban people and make them stateless. And that, as I said before, and from what I have read, is consistent with what the Attorney General has said on this issue.
There are various requirements of extradition, some of which have been bandied about in the press recently in relation to other persons who have been extradited, who have attempted to be extradited from Trinidad. But it's not as simple as France saying we want to extradite this person because, as far as we're concerned, they are a member of ISIS. We were recently bombed, and therefore, as far as I recollect, there must be a commensurate offense in the host country as there is in the extraditing country. So that, as I say, persons who may have only been a member of ISIS, perhaps they went there once, they signed up, they waved a few flags, they came back home. Persons who their participation may have been relegated to that. I do not know that our local law consider such persons terrorists.
Hence, a very clear reading of what was signed as far as the cooperation to fight international terrorism. A very clear understanding of that is paramount.
That's correct. That's correct. Like I said, the legislation is, the words using legislation are quite wide, but I do not know whether they could be strained to include persons who simply affiliate by hanging around, celebrating with ISIS persons in ISIS who are bombing and shooting persons, etc., etc.
I've not heard of a state of emergency put on a residence.
No, I mean, a state of emergency would have to be justified by a state of emergency. So, if you're going to put one person under house arrest, what is the emergency to put that he potentially has committed a crime in Syria or Iraq? Would that count as an emergency in Trinidad? It seems...
the Attorney General said we will move to protect the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago in every way possible, but we will not willy-nilly, I paraphrase here, we will not willy-nilly go about banning or stripping the citizenship of national. That's one of the thin lines that you have, Attorney Saunders, where you understand there is a real danger. You have seen, you have experienced something that's not good. You see what an organization represents, and now you have to balance that information and that reality with the other reality, which is the constitutionality of actions.
That's correct. And I certainly do take the caller's point that if something like that were to occur, the discussion to ban persons who would be suspected of participating in ISIS would be taken or be discussed a lot more seriously than it is now, especially among persons in the government.
I was heartened by the position taken by the Attorney General, heartened and encouraged because, as I said, it is, as you just said, should something go wrong as a result of this, there is a whole lot of heat that will follow. But it is a courageous stand, but it is a stand constitutionally as to what you cannot do.
That's great.
And that's what we're looking at. Attorney Yuri Saunders, member of the Law Association, and you took you took the calls as they came, and I'm chuckling because we sort of anticipated that would be the reaction, because it's difficult to differentiate between a real need to have something done about a real threat. Let's be real clear on that. We are very clear on that. But how you go about it,
and the thing is, at this stage, assessing the risk is very difficult. So it will compound, the problem of what should the government do to deal with the situation. What is justified in the circumstances to deal with the situation,
Callers, nowhere is there a lack of recognition of the urgency of dealing with this situation and finding a solution. However, panaceas are things you don't find. And many times the rights of one person, while many say, well, the rights of the many must override the rights of the few, we also have to be very careful of that, because the few, what is meted out to them can become something that the many have to deal with.
That's correct. That is correct.
Attorney Saunders, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me, Rennie.
I thank you.